Welcome to this 101 Ways podcast. This is us giving back to the tech community. And with 101 ways to solve a problem, we hope you'll find the right expertise here to help you solve yours. Don't forget to follow this podcast on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And in this case, it's a team takeover episode. So this is where some of the 101 Ways team debate a hot topic. I'm Ollie Happy, Product Principal. This week I'm joined by Grant Smith, who's Engineering Director, and Matt Penhall, who is Delivery Principal. Welcome, folks. Today's topic is It Takes Three to Lead Effectively. So let's begin. So there is a concept, particularly in Agile and just generally in software engineering, that it's better if we work together on what the right outcome might be at any point. And maybe we'll start with you, Grant. It takes three to lead effectively. What does that mean to you?
So it means there's three roles to be played, whether they're jobs or functions, kind of doesn't really matter. But there's a role for someone to help us understand what the business needs, what the specific product needs, aligning all those things together and bringing together a bunch of complex stakeholders to present a single view into a team so it can be delivered. There's a role there to ensure that team works with quality and it's sustainable and that it can support what it builds. And then there's a role there to make sure everything gets done when it needs to get done. And that complex mix of stakeholders that we've just talked about, when they have hard points in the calendar and schedules and deadlines and those kinds of things, that the team is aligned with those concepts. So those three things have to be done no matter what job titles people have, no matter what has to be done. There's no getting away from it. So those three roles have to be performed. I think one of the interesting things that's happened in the 25 odd years I've been doing this is the fashions that have changed. Sometimes it's, delivery is a formal job. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes product is, sometimes it isn't. In fact, I'm old enough to have worked before product managers were really even a thing in digital. And then we had business owners and things like that. But this is kind of the central theme to this. Now, the concern, or one of the things that we will talk about here, is the idea of a mandatory structure and how it should be implemented and how companies become product led and those kinds of things. But yeah, that's what It Takes Three means to me.
Thank you. And Matt, if we throw to you now, so if you think about the emergence of Agile, the world before, and what the Agile framework has introduced into the Three Amigos concept, etc., how would you describe that, and how do you feel about how things have moved?
I think it's really leaning into what Grant was talking about and having three different perspectives to any problem, really, because there are three ways of looking at anything, from either the how, the when, or the who. I think it's, the whole idea of Agile is, the idea of collaboration yielding the right outcome more often than not. And if you have that collaboration at the heart of your teams across product, tech, and delivery, you stand the best chance of success, not only in yielding the right outcome, be it an outcome for the user or the business, or even the team themselves, but being a great translation layer internally and externally as well. Because I find a lot of the problems come from when that translation layer isn't there and you're not unable to talk about the work in the right way, whether that's within the team to set everyone up to succeed because everybody's working within context, or talking outside of the team, be it, with maybe a few of your peers in another team, or even across organizational boundaries to talk about, how the work's being done, what they can expect and what you need from them. So for me, the heart of it is all around collaboration, having that leadership trinity at the heart of a successful team.
Tell us a bit more about the translation layer, because I think that and the flight levels concept that you often talk about, I think those are quite key here. Because often I find that we look at it, we sit in a team, we look at what the team needs to achieve, we look at the people that we've got, we put them together and build a process that works for us, and forget what's happening outside those organizational boundaries.
It's super important. It's the one thing that's easy to kind of fall foul of. When you're when I find when I'm trying to be an effective translation layer, it's being able to sit at the nexus point of the three disciplines, plus design as well, if you've got them in the mix as well. And being able to turn what is quite a complicated problem into words that are broadly understandable across those organizational boundaries, because you're going to have to work with, I don't know, marketing, you might have to work with operations, you might have to work with HR. There's all sorts of people who comprise a business, and being able to talk about the delivery in terms that are accessible set you up to succeed more often than not. So it's that real ability to cut through a lot of the jargon, because particularly in agile ways of working, for those who haven't necessarily had a first-hand experience, there is so much verbal shorthand. So being really conscious of that and putting it into terms that are broadly accessible across a wide audience is so important to the success of a team, or if you're scaling delivery across many teams.
I think there's another aspect to that translation layer, which is a part of what you're talking about, Matt, which is that in order to solve problems, we have to break them down into smaller problems, right? So that's obviously what engineers do for a living, right? Somebody gets a bright idea, we got to break it down into something that we can actually get done and we can track and that kind of stuff. But that's not just an engineering problem. If you've got a product and there's a big marketing campaign coming and needs a bunch of changes, to that marketing team, that's the campaign, right? That's the big thing. That's all they've been working on for the last 3-4 months or whatever. To those of us in a team that's kind of trying to deliver things for that, that's not a very helpful concept. I've got to break it down into chunks. As a product person, those chunks might be features or capabilities or bug fixes, whatever they are, but that's the first set of, let's break this down into something that I can get my head around, that the team can work on, that delivery can help me track, that provides that translation layer back up to marketing when they say, are you going to be ready for the big campaign? Well, that's not a binary answer, right? It's not yes or no. It's these things will be ready, these things I'm less confident on, those kinds of things. So it isn't just language translation. It's not just an abstraction thing. It's that there's a product feature / capability breakdown of things. There's the engineering breakdown of how I deliver those different pieces. Then there's the kind of project or delivery breakdown of what's the sequencing of those things? Are there dependencies? Who else is involved? What other stakeholders might we need to get into a room to help us work this stuff out? And so it's a translation layer, Matt, you're absolutely right. But it's also each of us involved in doing that translation are also trying to break this thing into, you've given me a big, hairy, audacious goal. That's awesome. Thanks, business. Now I've got to figure out how I get this done. And ideally, I want to do all of it. But, realistically speaking, in software engineering, 80% is done. So kind of that's what do I sacrifice? We've all been in that world. So yeah, it's translation layer, 100%. And it's great when you get multiple people together. So someone can say, hold up, that's jargon. I don't get that bit. What are you waffling about? And if we have that kind of honest relationship, then we get the right answer. And if it's the answer of some database is difficult to get at or we don't have permissions, if people like marketing know about that stuff, they can be a sledgehammer to get blockers out of our way. But if they don't know and they don't understand the implications of what I'm complaining about, and I don't necessarily know they don't understand, that's again where I think that translation layer really comes in. It's to make it clear that something's a blocker and it needs to be cleared away, and we need the suitable authority to do that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's the up and down, what do I call it? The up and down the line management of expectations to people who are on the receiving end of whatever the change is. And if we talk about really practical examples, Grant talks about, breaking down a big problem. Having a plan is a very good idea. Now following that plan blindly and expecting success isn't, because, what's the famous quote? No plan survives
Contact with the enemy. Yeah.
But the value in a plan is doing the planning. Understand where those touch points might be, understanding where those dependencies might be, and being able to spot the smoke before the fires break out. Yeah. That's a super important piece to being that translation layer. Also, software development isn't linear, and that's quite an abstract concept for those who haven't had the lived experience to understand. So providing a plan, knowing that it's adaptable and it's always subject to change, gives your audience something that they're used to seeing. And that can be really effective as long as you manage it really well as a good leadership team within your little development team or product team or however you're running things. But typically I'd expect the delivery manager to really be leading the charge on that, with the balance of the product and technologist who's sharing that leadership to be the balance in the conversation.
So that's
that reminds me. Sorry, Ollie. That reminds me of a story from my early days in software engineering when I was at AOL, when project management fell out of favor. So this was before Agile, and we decided we weren't going to have any delivery people anymore. And so all of those managers were sent on a project management course, a learning tree project management course. We learned about the V method. That was the whole thing back then. And what came back to me, I did the training. It made sense. It was fine. Come back into the organization. The first insight I had was that planning takes time, and no magical time had showed up in my calendar to allow me to do it. And then the second thing I realized was it takes practice. You get better at it over time. And not just you get better at it, as in the person playing that project management role gets better at it, but everyone participating gets better at it over time. So it's the kind of thing, one of the rules we have in software is if something is difficult, you do it a lot. So it isn't difficult anymore, right? Well, that's true for planning as well. And I think that's one of those things that we see again and again in companies, particularly companies that have decided they don't want delivery as a specific role. What they say is, the actual concepts of planning, the actual concepts of running a sprint and that kind of stuff, they're not terribly complicated, but they do require a lot of muscle memory. They require time out of the day to do it. They need proper allocation of that time and those kinds of concepts. So it's not only is planning invaluable, but it does take time, particularly as you're not practiced and particularly in a team that's not mature. If that team's only just formed or is just starting out, we all know that could be a really painful process. The 3-hour refinement meeting before you get it, down to a kind of 45 minutes or whatever it can be. So I think there is that factor of not only is it time consuming and it's really super valuable and it's necessary for providing that translation, but it also takes practice and it takes time to get good at it.
Yeah. And the other thing I'd add to that is, we talk about a plan being a great idea, but it doesn't go anywhere without drilling the basics, as Grant was saying. Getting practice at if you're doing Scrum, do the basics really, really well. And if you start to get good at them, the other pieces start falling into place. Because if you do a plan without, having the really strong foundations or basics in place, that plan's not really going to mean anything. Because the team needs to be able to kind of connect to that plan and know how they fit into that plan and know that they can inform that plan as well. It's not happening to them.
It's a planning, not a planning event.
Yeah, exactly. One of the times Grant and I worked together on a big modernization project. We came in, had a look at the teams, they were just forming, and it became really, really clear to me that I really need to drill the basics with these teams so that we can build up that muscle memory, we can build up that resilience, and we can get to a point where we can start talking about forecasting delivery. But without, drilling those basics from the outset, it would have made the delivery much more difficult, as the weeks and months wore on.
And planning is not an individual sport, is it? It's a team sport. And I'm sure we've all seen plenty of occasions, and I've experienced plenty of occasions of trying to plan in isolation and how difficult that is and how much longer that takes and how many factors will be missed.
Yeah, and it's not, as you said, it's not a one and done. It's not an event. It's iterative and also it needs practice, and people get better at it and plans get better at it. And I think it's quite an unreasonable expectation that I often see in our industry, that people say, well, just make a plan. Like that's a 2-second job and you just scruff it down and you're good, right? One of the things we see again is particularly in unhealthy organizations, plans are considered gospel, right? They cannot change. That date is now committed, it's locked in, all those kinds of things. And there's lots of nuances to this, right? I mean, having done a bunch of development for marketing campaigns that have fixed dates, work back 3 months, right? Whatever it is we're building, let's make sure it's ready 3 months before somebody decides to put it on TV, because otherwise it's not going to work, right? And I know that's kind of quite a really rough thing to say in terms of, that's a very blanket rule. But if you've had any experience in software, far better to have that feature ready to go behind a feature flag and you can just toggle it than be working close to that deadline, particularly because things will change. You are going to have to modify it at some point. So better to get it built and modify it rather than try and intercept it halfway through and butcher it. So yeah, not only is planning a group activity, it's also not a one and done. If you are producing a plan, no, you're producing plans, and they get modified and they get changed and new information comes in. And it is we're very happy to say in tech, we've been saying this for 20 years, the only constant is change, and yet we assume plans don't. And that is just the dumbest thing ever. Because far better to approach planning with the idea of, this is a statement of now, this is a snapshot, I've dated the plan as of this date, bearing in mind all of these things that we know. And then you review and we say, well, the plan's going to change. And sometimes it's because we misunderstood a complexity in engineering. Yeah, that happens, right? Sometimes it's because we've decided to reschedule this marketing campaign, or it needs another factor or something else. But yeah, this idea that planning is this ongoing constant is the issue. Again, I'm going to harp on about this a lot, but one of the things I've seen in companies where they decide, well, we don't need delivery people anymore, is because they think this idea of planning, well, you just do it once, right? And then you're good. Rather than, no, this is going to require constant work. And I don't think that's appreciated very much. And I think one of the problems is leadership often forget the complexity of actually implementing, right? So they probably were implementing people and individual contributors at one point, they've kind of risen up. And then they're living in this world where planning for them is, well, let's get together in a room, agree the strategy, draw a roadmap, and we're good, right? But then you get the actual complexity of implementation, and something isn't possible, or something is possible, but it's way more work, and maybe that's impractical, and all of this kind of stuff. And they sort of lose the fact that whatever plans you've come up with in your boardroom need to have a feedback loop from reality.
And a lot of ideas will be contributed along the way. A lot of opportunities will be missed, right? Like, I'm hearing you both talk, I'm thinking, okay, so we've got a group of people, often the three amigos, who are looking at something that needs to be done and working out where we are and where we need to be and how to get there. But then there's other voices, aren't there? Like, there's particularly voices from young folks who've just come into the team and will say things like, do we have to re-platform the whole thing and all the features? And it's very easy to just say, well, yeah, that's what we've decided to do, and we've got to get it done by this date. But there's value in that question, isn't there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But also other voices that don't get listened to as much. I started in tech in customer care. Customer care is often quite a quiet voice in places. They're seen as a cost center. They're just the people at the end of the thing, right? I absolutely don't buy that approach. I think strategic customer care can be really important, particularly into retention. So, from a marketing perspective, but they have a voice. They know what customers are struggling with. They know some things that work and don't. And that voice of, this is where that translation layer thing comes in, right? Again, that project Matt and I worked on, it was super easy to just involve customer care enough that they had a voice and they could help directors and we could make sure they were listened to, right? That's quite hard to do without somebody to help you figure out who your stakeholders are, managing their expectations, planning for them, those kinds of things. So there are lots of voices that can come into this stuff that without care might get ignored.
Brilliant. Let's have a think about, I think that's a good way to lead into some of the challenges that teams and businesses face when assembling groups of people to lead and make decisions at different levels. So do you want to just continue on, Grant, or Matt?
Yeah. No, I will, because I have strong views on this one.
I know.
Temperament is the thing that everybody misses. And I know there's some good stuff written on this stuff, right? You cannot just put a product manager, a delivery manager, and an engineering manager in a room and say, smash it, fellas. It's not going to go, right? It can work, and I've seen it work. I've also seen it fail probably more often than I've seen it work. One of the things that I go on about is the engineering manager in that little trio is probably the quietest and probably the least opinionated, but they still have an important voice. The project Matt was talking about, I talk about this quite a lot. We had a phenomenal relationship between product, delivery and engineering. But I think it's really important to note that the engineer in that mix had 10 or 15 years experience on the other two. And I think that makes a difference. I think had I been at the same stage in my career as those two, then it wouldn't have been as successful a relationship. And I'm not trying to say your engineering manager always has to be older, but what I am saying is if you don't build that little team for their temperament, for their ability to work together, for them to be able to recognize and respect each other's voices and to be able to operate as a team, i.e. when somebody will disagree and commit anyway, and those sorts of concepts, then what I've seen more often than not is that you either end up with actually it's a team of two and one person gets sidelined, or worst case scenario, it's a team of one and two people are sidelined, but it doesn't just automatically work because you've said that's a product manager, that's a delivery manager, that's an engineering manager. That there's no guarantee. So you have to look at the temperaments of those people and their connection to the business, their ability to work together, those kinds of things. It isn't just assemble three humans and off you go. This is not cookie cutter. Particularly with these three humans who are going to be making decisions about what we build, how we build, and when we get it done, those are kind of key constraints, right? You couldn't just trust that to any three people you pull in together. And that's the most common mistake I see made. People think of this troika as a kind of standardization cookie cutter. Oh, we want to be product-led. Stamp, stamp, stamp. That's not a thing.
It's also important that those leaders develop their own relationship as well. Like, you really invest in it because, there are going to be points of friction, and that's okay. Now, you can work through those problems, but if you start to really invest in that relationship together, however you want to do that, you really set yourself up to be more successful than if you don't invest that time.
Yeah, and what we're doing is really difficult. That's the kind of whole point, right? Some important people have been pulled together to try and achieve this super difficult thing together. Well, then form as a team. Again, one of the things I see a lot is you'll get those three people and then they're in meetings 40 hours a week and they might see each other for 1 hour a week, maybe. That's not enough time to build a team. I mean, actually, this doesn't just affect product delivery and engineering. This is a common problem that leadership teams face, C-level, that kind of stuff. If they only ever spend an hour a week together, how is that a team? How are they going to build a relationship? How are they going to kind of lead effectively as a team? Particularly, as you say, Matt, when things get difficult and compromises are needed, those are the moments when tempers fray and things are tricky. But if you trust the other two people are also there to achieve the same things you are, then that becomes a much healthier conversation than if I feel like I'm being bullied on the quality of what I produce and, I'm going to be held accountable for that. Whereas if we're all there for the same thing and we respect what each other is accountable for, then I think it can work. So temperament plus some relationship building plus an understanding of what we're there to do. Yeah.
Plus, I think on top of that, an understanding of what it takes to lead. That if we take, let's say, an engineer and a really great engineer who's been in the business for a while, might be a subject matter expert. They've got this branch in their career where the fork in the road is to go into architecture or into team leadership. They go into the engineering management path. That's great. They've got 5 or 6 engineers that they look after. That's a workload, right? And if they need to manage those folks and provide them the support they need and contribute to the daily, monthly, quarterly leadership decision-making cycles that need to happen, that time needs to be factored in, doesn't it? One of my mentors used to say, it's important to always carve out time for working on the business, not just working in the business.
Yeah, and I think that applies to product as well. How many product managers almost turn themselves into delivery managers because they're not doing product research, they're not doing competitor analysis, they're not doing discovery or focus groups or any of those things. They're just mechanistically smashing through a bunch of features and stuff like that to get it done. I see that all the time. And the same again, it's true in delivery. How many people are just smashing out stories and making sure the Kanban boards are organized and stuff and not thinking ahead and not organizing stakeholders and not seeing where the next thing might be coming from. So this is one of the things that I teach all of my people, all of my senior engineering people, is time management is the biggest problem. Got to make time for all of those things. If you're a product manager and you are leading your team and you haven't done competitor analysis recently, or you haven't done discovery, or you don't have a way of speaking to your customers directly in some fashion, then you're not really a product manager anymore. You're doing something else. Now, that something else has value, but my point is you're kind of excluding a whole bunch of things. So there's for each of those 3 functions, they have jobs they have to do. And so that's where, if you're going to double up on one of those and you're going to say, okay, engineering managers also do delivery, or product also does delivery, or whatever, or mixing any of those up, you've now just doubled that time management problem. So not only do I have to go to all those meetings and switch context constantly between my 2 different functions and disciplines, I've then also got to do all of that other individual contributor type work to make sure I'm doing that role well. I think that's where it starts to get difficult. And that's why I have such a strong opinion on delivery being its own separate role, its own separate job.
Yeah, and I think I've certainly lived the experience of product and engineering trying to get something done and finding that more and more time is not going into the delivery thinking that should be happening, and therefore it accumulates and becomes delivery debt. Maybe that's a new phrase. And eventually everything stops because we've not been doing it. And I think perhaps that's one of the reasons that 101 Ways is so strong in delivery, is because there's such a great need in the market. Because we've, as you were saying, Grant, we've had that period of, could we pare this back and just share these 3 roles amongst 1 or 2 people? Let's try that. That's lean, isn't it? No, it's not. There's still 3 roles, right, Matt?
I find that when it's working really well, I mean, we talk about that time management piece. I always talk about it from a delivery perspective, the delivery manager. I want to help the leaders, whether they technologists or product or whoever, or senior leaders within the organization, get above the constant background hum, because it exists. There is a level of just hum that sits in the background. And when your leaders are drawn into that in the day-to-day, it doesn't leave room or space for the job that they need to be doing. So that's where great delivery can come into the piece. And Grant, if we just reflect on the few big projects we've worked on, one thing that I found most useful was I was able to point you in the direction of something that I thought might be a problem. Everything else is going pretty well, but Grant, I think we might have a problem over here. Can you just go and have a look? I'm kind of out of my depth from a technical perspective, but just give that a little bit of a nudge. And you're able to come back and say, actually that is, or no, we're fine because of reasons X, Y, Z. So, we talk about managing expectations externally, but it's also managing expectations internally of what the best use of time is to pave the way for strong delivery.
And I've referenced a few times this idea of, delivery is a role. I haven't made the point about product, but products is too, in terms of I've been part of teams where there wasn't a product manager, and our job with a delivery manager was to try and figure out the right thing. Oh, you don't need one. You're just taking 2 search pages and making them into one. Without a product manager, that was still really painful, right? Who do I negotiate with to figure out this compromise or that compromise? Should this functionality win or that functionality? Because there isn't clearly a winner here, but I can only implement one. Trying to lead on those things without a product person who can go do that research, go figure it out, go pull those stakeholders together, get me an answer that aligns with strategy is really painful. And when I've had to ask someone to take on that role where they're not natively a product manager, they've absolutely done the best job they can or what have you. But again, without a practice and experience of doing it, it's way harder. So this isn't something where anyone is optional. Things always get difficult at this point. Somebody will say to me something like, we're a small company. We can't really afford, 3 people doing this kind of stuff. And my answer is always, you can't afford not to. Because if you don't, you're just not going to get it done. And then, 6 months down the line when you're not getting the result you want, the thing you're not going to think in your head is, that was that compromise I made. You're going to blame a whole bunch of other things because the other things you're talking about will be symptoms. They're just not the root cause of what got you here. And the symptoms stand out much clearer than the root cause. But when you've got a team that doesn't understand how the business strategy links to their day-to-day work, there's evidence that your product manager isn't being effective or you haven't chosen to have one. That's often a classic one. I see this all the time where business leaders will say to me, our engineers complain that we don't really have a strategy or they don't understand the strategy, and yet we've got a strategy doc and it's right here. And I'm like, where's the context for them? So I'm a person, I'm writing some Python. How do I look up and see how that business strategy and my work aligns? If I can't, well, who's helping me do that? If you're going to put that on my engineering manager again, great. How many things does that person have to do every day in their life?
How do they know that this code will be reused or will not be reused in the next 12 months?
Yeah, exactly. What's the guidance on the quality of that? Now, I don't often take guidance on the quality, right? Because code quality isn't something I compromise on very often. But you're still right, though, right? Every engineer that's been coding for more than 10 years has written a dodgy hack that's possibly still live. And it would have been great had we understood that shouldn't have been a dodgy hack and it maybe should have been something that we did better. So most engineers have a story like that somewhere.
And even if
they're all dead now.
even if they do have the time, it's important for them and for the team that they are working with, particularly if there's a pair programming type scenario, to understand, where is this going? What is this component that I'm working on going to be used later? Or is it a standalone piece? That guides a lot of decision making, doesn't it, in the day-to-day for an individual contributor.
Yeah.
And just looping back to what you were saying about product folks, something I've been thinking about a lot, and as we look across a variety of businesses and situations, the things that seem to be quite clear are that sometimes it's the naming of something that makes it difficult. So the word product, it's quite a loaded word, really. And if you think about, what the Illuminati, someone like Marty Kagan will say, product people are people who love solving problems in sustainable ways. Love solving problems, attitude, probably can be coached, can be found in a number of different roles. And the business in terms of operations or commercial engineers, delivery, project, program people come together with that I like to solve problem mindset. But then the sustainable ways piece, that's lived experience, right? That's the coaching, the learning, the understanding, and the working with others. But taking that and applying it to the types of projects or things that need to get done, I can quite understand why a leadership team would say, okay, I understand that our portal, where our users log in and subscribe and pay us for service, is a product. I get that. I understand that the web app and the mobile app are concise products. That makes sense. They're value streams. Maybe for different types of customer, they make sense, for the commercial market, for the consumer market. But, what about this new contact center? That's not a product. That's just us needing to move our contact center from what it was on-prem into maybe something that's in the cloud. Why would we need a product person for that? It's not a product. Will it even be an enduring thing? But of course, it still needs problems solved in a sustainable way, right?
Yeah, and that's actually a great example, because it's the kind of thing that it doesn't generate revenue, so everyone's considering it a cost. And one of the things I think product brings to that is looking for the value. Because as again, customer care, I'm a big fan of customer care. It absolutely can be a value generator, right? There's a lot of evidence out there that says a customer who had a bad experience that was solved by customer care has a higher lifetime value than customers that don't. Now, that maths is really tricky to do, especially in newer businesses that don't have the data for it. But in older businesses, that's well understood. Now, people still outsource customer care and they still do it on the cheap and all the rest of it. If you bring that product perspective to it, there's at least that sense that we've looked for the value, we've seen what's in there, and there's then going to be the compromises. So, typically if you're doing that kind of project with your contact center, you are looking to gain some advantages. Maybe it's a cost-saving advantage, maybe it's something else. Those metrics, as in how are we measuring this stuff? How do I compare old versus new? That kind of stuff. That needs the kind of refinement thinking that a product manager can bring to this stuff. It isn't purely an engineering problem. It certainly isn't a delivery problem. It's something where someone has to say, I got two numbers. They don't mean the same thing. How do I align these with business value and present those in a certain way? I'd go even more esoteric. My background's DevOps and stuff. Your CI/CD pipeline is a product. It has an audience. They have a problem. It's a product that needs to be built to a certain quality standard, needs certain availability. Pick anything you like, right? If there's an ETL script that moves your data from one thing into your data warehouse so that you can process it, it has a value. It does something. All of these things are products. And I'm not trying to make work happen. What I'm trying to say, though, is every time someone builds some little capability to go do a thing and then the business is dependent on it and forgets all about it, well, there was an opportunity. You could have had a product manager figure this thing out. There's a great story. Again, this is from AOL a million years ago. We got a consultancy to come in and do some analysis, and they found something like the business was dependent on 150 linked spreadsheets because all of the revenue reporting, all of this kind of stuff had come in and got gradually built on over the years until somebody realized we don't actually have a coherent enterprise resourcing planning system. And we got one and things got better. But it's one of those things where that's how this happens, right? Little functionality, wasn't really paying attention to it. Now suddenly we're dependent on this complete interlinked, non-testable, non-supportable solution. A little bit of product thinking of how should this come together and what should the requirements be and who else is going to, what's the audience for this thing and is there a real problem there? makes you build better, more sustainable solutions. But equally, you can have the opposite effect. I've seen just as many good product managers kill ideas because once a little bit of investigation had been done, there isn't any value underneath that, or it's not something that has any tangible benefit, or it's such unproven revenue it needs more research or something. So there's just having that product person just has someone who can spend the time to do that analysis into, is this problem worth solving and who for, and how big is the market and all those kinds of things, is a really valuable thing to have in itself.
Absolutely. So something I'd like us to think about now is how to form teams to bring these three threads of decision making into play in existing teams. So Matt, I know this is something that we spend a lot of time doing day in, day out, and it has a lot of value. What sort of advice do you have for leaders who look at their business and say, we're a bit project-led. We need to be quite a lot more fast-moving than that. We recognize there's going to need to be some roles that emerge out of this, and those people are going to need to move together to make decisions in a faster way.
I guess my advice around that is a lot of what we talked about already. If you're going to put those leaders together, not just the domain expertise that those individuals bring, but to what Graham was talking about is focus on temperament and make sure you've got the right people working with each other in service of the team and the outcome that they're going after. I would also say, organizations that are looking towards transformation are typically not in a very strong starting position. There's probably a load of complexity that they're dealing with day to day. There's something I talk about, and I read it as a quote somewhere. I'm going to reference it. I can't remember actually where I got it from, but there's a difference for me between complication and complexity. And particularly, older organizations are looking for that transformation. It's trying to deal with that complexity, because that complexity is not going away. What you can address is the complication. And complication's typically a function of disorder. So it's just about getting organized a bit differently and making sure that you have a higher degree of transparency around the work that you're working on, so that you can actually deal with the genuine problems that you have, rather than just work's really hard to get done because I don't know what the other teams are doing. So really investing in how do we work with less complication by getting organized a bit differently, but not optimizing within that. And what I mean by that is, if you bring a level of order around what you're working on by organizing your teams a bit differently, maybe putting in this trinity of leadership, what have you, your teams are probably going to see a benefit and the business is going to see a benefit, and that'd be great. But that's not what the end state needs to be, because you can start to chop away at the different layers of complexity and dependencies and all those sorts of things that makes it a difficult organization to work within. You need to keep evolving over time. So removing the complication by getting a bit more organized, but then continually challenging the status quo so that you're reducing the complexity over time as well. And that could be some modernization, bring in some modern technology that's easier to work with than the old monolith. It could be about, bringing in that kind of product thinking and really interrogating value and why you're working on things that you're working on. Bring in good delivery to help, stitch it all together and help, be that translation layer, trinity of leadership. There's loads of things you can do. Start removing the complication.
And I love that analogy, Matt, that complexity thing, because you brought up monoliths, right? One of the reasons why monoliths have a bad rap is because the complication was allowed to enter to solve some complexity problem, right? There's nothing inherently wrong with a software monolith. It's only wrong when you don't manage your dependencies and there's not proper testing and you can't, draw lines between different systems and that kind of stuff, which is where that point comes again. So you gave a difficult problem to an engineer. They've got this single code base. They solve the problem in a single code base, but they're not thinking about the sustainability of it necessarily, because that's not their job. Their job is to get this software written, right? They've got a deadline, that kind of thing. Without having that group there to ask those complicated questions, such as, should this be solved in this place here? Should it be solved somewhere else? That kind of stuff. But also, to your point, Ollie, in terms of sustainability, in terms of, is this just a dodgy hack that's going to be out of here in 10 minutes? In which case, let's make sure we plan to get it out, right? You can take on technical debt, just make sure you got a plan to pay it back, just like all other debt, right? So I think your point is there. The business can be complicated, but it usually isn't. The business is usually relatively simple, but complexity has been allowed to come in through various different ways, right? And this is entropy, right? This is without energy, things do decay into disorder. The same is true for software as it is for everything else in life. And this, having the right temperament of people that are aligned around the right values and can have the right kind of high quality conversation is one of the places you insert energy into the system to fight against entropy.
Yeah. And it feels like when considering a C-suite or an executive team who can see some symptoms and can see the need for some change and for some transformation, to understand that, as you say, they are going to need to contribute energy and allocate team energy and time to reorganizing, to your point, Matt, because that takes effort, and the effort may not be immediately, the value from that, received from that effort might not be immediately obvious, but it certainly will become obvious as cycles pass.
Yep.
And the thing I would add to Matt's answer in terms of assembling these teams and pulling the right people together and stuff, there's this great theory from a guy called Simon Wardley, Pioneers, Settlers and Town Planners. And the way he expresses it is that sometimes some people at some point in their lives are pioneers. They want to go new places, do new things, right? Their voyage is about discovery. And sometimes they're settlers, right? They want to go into something that already exists and just make it bigger and grow and expand it. Sometimes they are in a town planning mode. They want to make it efficient and fast and work really well. And depending on what problem you're solving, having an idea of what people's preferences are when you pull them into the team will save you a lot of problems later. If you are trying to make something super efficient and just rinse every penny of value out of it, getting a bunch of pioneers into that team is going to be a nightmare. They are not going to be happy. You are not going to get the result you're looking for. Now, that's not the only lens to look at this thing. I find it a really useful lens, particularly in software, because when I say those three types to you, you've probably all remembered people from your past about who was a pioneer or a settler or a town planner, right? There's amazing engineers in each of those categories. And people change, over time and to get older and that kind of stuff. But it's a lens to say, if I am building a product that's very mature and I'm looking to experiment in it and just really kind of smash the value out of it, then I do want to have people that love that kind of thing, that are motivated by this kind of stuff. And again, I see too many organizations thinking that this whole thing is a cookie cutter. That's a developer, that's a delivery, that's a product. Go smash that out without any mindfulness about what are you going after and what are the results you're looking to see. And I think there's a thing I read when I was researching organizational structures, which is an over-application of an organizational structure is just as bad as not having an organizational structure. Right? You need to put a little bit of thought into what do I want this to be structured like and who are the right people to kind of staff that out. Now, if you want to argue with me and say, oh, but, the humans are replaceable, it's the team that matters and that kind of stuff, I take that to an extent. But depending on what that team is going after, what that mission is, you need to have the right people that can help you achieve that. If you put a pioneer in a team that's got a mature product, they will build new things. They are compelled to. And you don't want them to, so don't put them there.
Yeah. And people are not necessarily a deep, darky, murky depth. They'll tell you, won't they?
Oh, yeah.
I just love building new things. Okay.
This is the wrong team for you. Let's find you somewhere to build new stuff. No, I'm with you, right? You just ask them, what are you into? What do you enjoy? What are you motivated by? They'll tell you, absolutely. It's not hard.
Yeah. But I've heard a really good prompting question in that sense when line managing, to just say to often a young person or young to the team, so looking around at what you see around you in this business, what would you really like to solve? And that probably tells you where they fall in that pioneer, settler or town planner spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a guy that Matt and I worked with at Zoopla, I won't name him, who's definitely one of those town planners. He would just tell you, this thing is not fast enough or this thing is more expensive. I want to optimize it. There you go. In fact, you couldn't get him to not tell you. right? So it's almost the opposite. So yeah, this is one of the reasons why it's frustrating. One of the reasons I wanted to make the point was that it's not hard to do. It takes a tiny bit of extra thought beyond merely naming people in a spreadsheet, and yet I very rarely see it given any attention.
So let's just touch on that maybe as we wrap up. So Matt, I feel a little bit like it's easy to drift into take some time for planning, think about what you're there to do, and things will get better. And I can imagine busy executives saying, but I've got to ship this thing by that date, and I've got other things that are on fire. How do I carve that time out? And do I have to stop the machine and stop producing whatever we're producing for X months or years in order to optimize and organize a bit differently? What would you say to them?
I'd say start small, to be honest with you. You've got to have some proof points around demonstrating you can operate a bit differently, but also we often talk about this concept of an exemplar team, 101 Ways. Bring in a new team to work a bit differently and demonstrate that, you can build software product in a different way, bring in the kind of agile ways of working and product thinking, et cetera, et cetera. The tricky thing with that is, you're still going to have that exemplar team in a system that's, got its own challenges. That doesn't mean they can't be successful. They can still carve their way through the jungle with a machete. The tricky thing is when the jungle's growing back as fast as you can cut through it. But my point is you can use it as a proof point to the bits that are broken within your overall system to say, hey, these are the areas that we should be prioritizing to address. Could be technology, could be process, any number of things to be able to continue or to set yourself up for a more broad, more wider transformation. So yeah, wholesale change is never a good starting point, I guess is my point there.
Thank you. Yeah. Grant, any closing thoughts? Things you'd like folks to take away with them?
Yeah. On that subject, so I've waffled enough about who should be in the team. So let's talk about that bit. So there's that old expression, fail to plan, plan to fail, right? Everyone knows that one. But your question was, so what do I do? Stop the world for 1,000,000 years, all that kind of stuff. Time box it. People are not used to planning. They're not very good at it mostly. It is a difficult thing to do. So what you have to do is you have to make it safe to do it. Like, again, why do we have testing software? So it's safe to code, right? Same here. How is it safe to plan? Well, first of all, don't assume that these are tablets that have been inscribed by God, right? It's a plan, right? We can change it tomorrow if it didn't work out, right? So make it safe for people to plan. Time box the effort. Just that effort of breaking down a problem into chunks and writing it down has a value. But then the first time you start coding, you'll probably find things you missed. Great, replan. That's okay. Right? Just make that safe and let it keep going. And as Matt said, you start small. Again, if you've got a huge, great monolith and you're struggling with it, don't try and solve the whole thing. Just pick a piece and solve it. And if you can't, move on. Find another piece and try and solve that, right? You need to build up these muscles. You need to get better at it. And so you kind of need to be, you need to care for yourself and care for your teams so that you don't just commit yourself to some massive endeavor when you have no confidence in your ability yet.
The other thing I'm reflecting on, just within our audience here, we've got tech, we've got product, we've got delivery, and all the things that we've been talking about. We've been building on each other's ideas, but also, we also challenge each other's ideas as well. So you're far more effective as that trio of leadership when you're looking at problems from 3 different perspectives in service of the right outcome. Give you an abstract example. I went, 6 months ago, I went to the Light Rooms in London and down near King's Cross. And there's a great exhibition by a guy named David Hockney. He's like a visual artist, does all sorts of amazing things. But he had this one like collage photo of a chair. And it was photographs of this chair from every single angle. And he'd organized in a way that you could see the chair, at 4 legs, as you look like something you could sit on. It'd be sturdy enough. But you were looking at it from all 4 or 360-degree view of that chair. So you had a holistic view of that chair or the problem. And it just really resonated with me in a way that I hadn't thought of before. And that is, with 3 different perspectives on any problem, you're going to set yourself up for the best chance to succeed.
Well said. And I think that's a perfect way to wrap up. Thank you, gentlemen. And thank you, folks, for listening in. If you've got a burning topic that you'd like us to discuss on the show, please let us know in the comments. And if you've got a challenge that needs discussion, we are here for exactly that purpose. And we look forward to seeing you next time on the 101 Ways podcast.